As you're editing, you're always going to be making notes. Things you need to do, concepts you need to communicate to others on the creative team, or items that you need to check. In that regard, it's really nice to make notes right in your project, right on the shot, and even the frame that corresponds to your notes. You do this with markers. Now, it's easy to put a marker anywhere in your sequence. You simply move your cursor where you want to put a note. For example, right here on Kelly's title, I'd like to check to make sure that her name is actually spelled this way. So I'm going to just click on the title, and then I'm going to press M. You'll notice that a little green marker appears here. Now, if you can't see one, you're going to need to increase the size of your track. Notice that if my track is smaller, the marker goes away. As long as it's large enough, you'll be able to see it. And then if you press M again, the marker dialog box pops up. And so I'm just going to title this Spell Check. And I'm just going to say Kelly or Kelly. And I'll say OK. And now, if I hover over the marker, you can see that my pop-up says spell check and then the comment. All right, I think I'll come downstream a little bit. And I want to make sure that we have the rights to use our archival shots. So this time, because I know that I'm going to put a note in there, I'm just going to click on this and then press M twice really quick. And then the marker dialog box pops up. And I'm just going to call this rights check. And I'm going to say, did we purchase from Getty Images? And I'll say OK. And I want to show you something here. I'm going to increase this so I can actually see my marker. And we see it in the timeline here, but if I press F to do a match frame, which is going to load this archival shot in the source monitor, you can see that it's also here. So the last two markers that we added to the actual clip, and while we can see them in the timeline, what we're actually doing is adding them to the source clip. So if, for example, I wanted to place a marker in the timeline to cover all three of these, I'm just going to deselect the clip by clicking in the gray part of the timeline. And now I'm going to add a marker again. So I'm just going to press M twice. And then I'm just going to also call this rights check all archival. And then I'm just going to say check rights for all archival shots. Now, what I can do is actually add a duration to this so that it spans all three of these shots. I can just click on this and drag to the right a little bit. And now I can say OK. And it's over all of these shots in the timeline. So it's not attached to a specific shot, but just in this area. You can move this around if you want to. I'm going to double click on this to reopen the marker dialog box. And I want to talk about a couple of things down here. So far, we've been making comment markers, which is the default type, just adding notes. Other times, you might want to create a chapter marker so that when you send the project to make a DVD in Adobe Encore, for example, you can link chapter points to buttons and menus. And web link markers can be used to add URL information about a specific part of your sequence. And flash cue point markers can be used to trigger events or navigate interactive content within Adobe Flash technology. All right, so I'll cancel out of here. And I'm going to press the backslash key to fit the sequence in the timeline window. And so we have several markers. We have one here that's Kelly's title. We have another down here, which is attached to that archival shot's source clip. And we have another here, which is a sequence marker that contains a duration. I'm going to just make one more marker. I'm going to come here, and then I'm going to click on this piece of B-roll here. And then I'm going to press F, and I'm going to make the marker here in the source monitor. So before we made it in the timeline with the clip selected, here I'm going to go ahead and just create it right here in the source. So I'll press MM, and I'm just going to say letterpress logo shot, and I'll just say try to show letterpress logo, and I'll say OK. Now notice that it's applied here in the source, but it's also down here in the timeline. And if you can't see this, one reason is that the track is too small. But if the track is large enough, you need to come to this little wrench here and make sure that Show Clip Markers is selected. If I deselect this, watch what happens in the timeline. All of my clip markers go away, but you can see here that my timeline marker is still there. So I want to make sure that Show Clip Markers is on, and I have all my clip markers back. Now be aware that there's an entire marker menu here with lots of different commands with keyboard shortcuts. Some of the most useful ones, go to next marker and go to previous marker. You've got Shift-M and Shift-Command-M. That's Shift-Control-M on a PC. So if I want to go through the markers here, I can press Shift-M, Shift-M. It's going from marker to marker, and Shift-Command-M to go back. But probably the easiest way to see and access the markers in your sequence is to open the marker window, which is over here. I'm going to use this slider to go all the way over to the right, and markers is usually the second to last tab. Now, the reason that we only see one marker is that currently in the timeline, this piece of B-roll is selected, so that's the marker that we're seeing. If we actually selected a different piece of B-roll, watch the marker information change. So there's my rights check marker, here's my Kelly title marker, and if I deselect any of the clips by just clicking in the gray part of the timeline, you can see here that we get our sequence markers. So if I did another sequence marker, I'll go ahead and just come over here and press MM, and I'll say check timing to music, and I'll give this a duration, and I'll say make sure all edits are cut to the beat, and OK. You can see here that we can move that around. It's over our montage here, but now we have a couple of sequence markers, and if you click on either one of these, it will pop to that marker. Okay, so the markers window is a really nice way to see all of your marker information at once and to be able to see the poster frame, the name, and the comments here. And sometimes you'll want to hit tilde so that you can have a little bit more room to look. I'll press tilde again to minimize. All right, so those are markers. There's definitely more to explore, but that should get you started in looking at these handy little digital Post-it notes that allow you to communicate to yourself or to others about anything in your project.